And imagine June 4, 1944, 150 miles west of Cape Blanco, Africa, in the icy Atlantic Ocean. 58 German submariners surface, hands raised, their U-boat crippled and sinking. Surrounded by American warships in hostile waters, they brace for death, expecting gunfire or brutal interrogation. And they're the first enemy naval crew captured at sea by the U.S. Navy since 1812. But Captain Daniel Gallery's next move would stun these battle-hardened Germans, rewrite naval history, and create one of World War II's most remarkable tales of honor amid chaos. This isn't the story you expect. Before we uncover this hidden tale, and hit subscribe and like the video. By the end, and you'll see why one German officer said this moment restored his faith in humanity during history's bloodiest war. To grasp the significance and understand what U-boats meant in 1944, the German U-505 had terrorized Allied shipping for 2 years, and sinking vessels carrying not just supplies but personal treasures, letters, photos, medicine, and food for war-torn regions. And each attack was a personal tragedy for countless families. Submarine warfare was merciless by 1944. German U-boats sank Allied ships without warning, and while Allies destroyed U-boats on sight, rarely saving survivors, naval chivalry was dead. Enter Captain Daniel Gallery, and a Chicago-born Irish American who played by his own rules. Raised in a working-class neighborhood where honor trumped blind obedience, and Gallery commanded Task Group 23, hunting U-boats with the U.S. Guadalcanal and 5 destroyers. But he had a wild dream, not just to sink a U-boat, but to capture one intact, a feat unseen since 1812. His superiors called it madness. U-boats were built to sink fast, and German crews were ordered to scuttle them. Gallery trained his men anyway. Meanwhile, U-505 was enduring a cursed patrol. Its previous commander, and overwhelmed by a depth charge attack in 1943, killed himself in front of his crew, shattering morale. The new commander, 40-year-old Harold Lange, was under immense pressure. After 2 months at sea with no victories, the crew was exhausted, supplies low, and spirits broken. Unbeknownst to them, Gallery's task group was closing in. On June 4, Lieutenant William Tolan, patrolling in a Grumman TBF Avenger, spotted a dark shape underwater, a U-boat, and what followed was a 6-minute whirlwind, driven by a panicked German Sailor's 7-second mistake that saved lives. Tolan's depth charges crippled U-505, forcing Lange to surface or lose the boat. At 11:15 a.m., U-505 broke the surface, water pouring from its hull, and engines gasping. Gallery, on the Guadalcanal's bridge, seized the moment. Instead of destroying the sub, he gave the order, "Away all boats. We're boarding her." German sailors abandoned ship, jumping into the Atlantic, expecting death. But a critical error by Petty Officer Gottfried Fischer, who set scuttling charges for 7 minutes instead of 30 seconds, gave the Americans a window. Lieutenant Albert David, 23, led a boarding party onto the smoking U-505, knowing it could explode. Hearing ticking charges, David and his team descended into the flooding and smoke-filled sub. With no training in German demolitions, they disarmed the charges and closed the flooding valve, stabilizing U-505 within an hour. Inside, they found a treasure trove: codebooks, charts, an Enigma machine with current settings, and technical manuals. Intelligence that could save thousands of Allied lives. But if the Germans learned of the capture, they'd change their codes, rendering it useless. Gallery faced a dilemma: how to hide a 252-foot submarine and 58 prisoners. His solution was radical. Instead of harsh treatment, he ordered the Germans rescued, given medical care, dry clothes, and food. This wasn't just compassion. It was strategy. Treated prisoners were less likely to escape or reveal the capture. Gallery met with Lange, explaining they'd be treated honorably but isolated to protect the intelligence. The crew was secretly moved to Camp Ruston, Louisiana, undercover stories, housed in clean barracks with better food than many American soldiers received. They worked for wages and maintained military discipline. And this treatment not only ensured their cooperation, but yielded technical insights that aided the Allies. The intelligence from U-505, codes, charts, and in torpedo designs helped save countless ships and lives. Gallery's approach, treating enemies with dignity, and proved both morally and strategically brilliant, influencing prisoner treatment for the rest of the war. The German crew, expecting execution, and found respect instead. Lange, who lived until 2003, often spoke of how Gallery's decency restored his faith in humanity. Years later, and when U-505 was displayed at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry in 1954, and German U-boat veterans who had settled in America helped preserve it alongside U.S. veterans, ensuring this story of honor endured. And Gallery's choice showed that even in war's darkest moments, humanity could prevail. He didn't just capture a submarine, and he proved victory through honor outlasts brutality. If your family has stories of honor triumphing over hatred in World War II, share them below. These stories remind us that decency can survive even the worst of times, when individuals choose to see enemies as fellow humans. Picture this, June 4, 1944, and deep in the Atlantic Ocean, 150 miles west of Cape Blanco, Africa. The water is cold, the air tense. 58 German submariners break the surface, and hands raised in surrender. Their U-boat, the U-505, crippled and flooding beneath them. They're floating in enemy waters, surrounded by American warships, and, expecting the worst, machine gunfire to cut them down, or, if they're lucky, a brutal interrogation before execution. And these men are the first enemy naval crew captured on the high seas by the U.S. Navy since the War of 1812, a feat not accomplished in over a century. But what happens next, under the command of Captain Daniel Gallery, isn't just a military victory, it's a moment that shocks these hardened German veterans, rewrites naval history, and becomes one of World War II's most extraordinary stories of honor in the heart of total war. This isn't the story you think you know. And before we dive into this once classified tale, hit subscribe and like the video. By the end, you'll understand why one German officer said this moment restored his faith in humanity, even in the midst of history's most brutal conflict. To grasp why this moment was so remarkable, we need to set the stage. It's 1944, and the Atlantic is a battleground. German U-boats like the U-505 have been terrorizing Allied shipping for years. These submarines weren't just sinking military supplies, they were destroying lifelines. And every ship lost carried more than cargo letters from soldiers to their families, photographs of children, medicine for field hospitals, and food for starving people in liberated territories. When a U-boat struck, it wasn't just a strategic blow, it was a personal tragedy rippling across dozens, sometimes hundreds of families. By 1944, submarine warfare had descended into savagery. German U-boats operated under orders to sink any Allied vessel, and often without warning, leaving survivors to drown. The Allies, in turn, had adopted a ruthless policy: destroy U-boats on sight, and rarely bothering to rescue crews. The gentlemanly traditions of naval warfare, honoring surrender, rescuing survivors, were long gone, and both sides had embraced a brutal, no mercy approach. It was in this context of mutual savagery that our story unfolds. And the man at the center of this story is Captain Daniel Gallery, a Chicago-born Irish American with a sharp mind and a rebellious streak, and growing up in a working-class neighborhood. And Gallery learned early that your word was your bond, and treating people with respect mattered more than following rules blindly. By 1943, and he was commanding Task Group 23, a hunter-killer group tasked with tracking down U-boats in the Atlantic. His flagship was the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, supported by 5 destroyer escorts. But Gallery wasn't content with just sinking U-boats. He had a vision that bordered on obsession. He wanted to capture one intact. This was unheard of. Not since the War of 1812 had the U.S. and Navy captured an enemy warship on the high seas. U-boats were designed to sink quickly when damaged, and and German crews were under strict orders to scuttle their vessels to prevent capture. Gallery's superiors thought he was out of his mind, but he didn't care. He began drilling his men for the impossible, preparing them for a mission that seemed like a fantasy. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, and the U-505 was enduring the worst patrol of its career. This submarine had a grim history. Its previous commander, Captain Peter Zeszek, had suffered a psychological breakdown during a depth charge attack in October 1943. In front of his entire crew, he drew his pistol and shot himself in the head, unable to face the prospect of capture or defeat. The incident left the crew traumatized, superstitious, and convinced their boat was cursed. The new commander, Harold Lange, was 40, one of the oldest U-boat commanders in the German Navy, but inexperienced with the U-505. He was under immense pressure to deliver results. By June 4, 1944, the U-505 had been at sea for 2 months without sinking a single Allied ship. The crew was exhausted, supplies were dwindling, and morale was at an all-time low. What Lange didn't know was that Gallery's task group was closing in, tracking their every move. That Sunday morning, Lieutenant William Tolan was flying a routine patrol in his Grumman TBF Avenger when he spotted something unusual. A dark shape moving beneath the waves, and it was the unmistakable silhouette of a large submarine. At 11:09 a.m., he radioed the sighting, and what followed was a lightning-fast sequence of events that unfolded in just 6 minutes. And, hidden within those 6 minutes, was a single 7-second decision by a panicked German sailor that would change everything. And though no one would realize it until later, Tolan's depth charges hit their mark, catching the U-505 off guard. And the explosions damaged the submarine's diving planes and electrical systems, leaving Lange with an impossible choice: and stay submerged and risk the boat imploding, or surface and face the enemy. At 11:15 a.m., the U-505 broke the surface like a wounded animal, and water streaming from its hull, diesel engines coughing as the crew scrambled for air. Gallery, monitoring the radio from the bridge of the Guadalcanal, knew this was his moment. He had seconds to decide, and follow standard procedure and obliterate the submarine with gunfire, or attempt the impossible: board and capture it. His crew had trained for this, but it was still a gamble. Instead of giving the order to fire, Gallery shouted, "Weigh all boats, and we're going to board her!" German sailors were pouring out of the U-505's conning tower, jumping into the freezing Atlantic. Some were wounded, and others terrified, all expecting death. Thick black smoke billowed from the submarine's hull, and a sign it was badly damaged and possibly minutes from exploding. But neither the Americans nor the Germans knew about the critical mistake that had just been made. And among the German crew abandoning ship was Petty Officer Gottfried Fischer, tasked with setting the scuttling charges to sink the U-505 within seconds. And in his panic, Fischer made a catastrophic error. He set the timer for 7 minutes instead of 30 seconds. And this mistake gave the Americans a narrow window they didn't even know they had. The boarding party, led by 23-year-old Lieutenant Albert David of the U.S. Pillsbury, was preparing to climb onto an enemy submarine that could blow up at any moment. And David knew this was a suicide mission. The sub could be booby-trapped, remaining crew members might open fire, and the scuttling charges were ticking. Yet, with radio operator Stanley Dowiak and signalman Arthur Nispel, David climbed into a small boat and approached the smoking U-505. As they boarded, the sound of ticking charges echoed below decks. Water was flooding in through open valves, and electrical fires were spreading in the control room. And David made a split-second decision that would save the submarine, and potentially the German crew still in the water. Instead of retreating, he ordered his men below to find and disarm the charges. Working by flashlight in a smoke-filled, flooding submarine, David located the main scuttling valve and closed it, stopping the flood. Wodowiak found the timing mechanism, with no knowledge of German demolitions, carefully disconnected the wires. One wrong move could have sent them all to the bottom of the Atlantic. Within an hour, and the U-505 was stabilized and under tow, a prize unlike any other. But the real treasure was inside. In their haste to abandon ship, and the German crew had left behind an intelligence officer's dream code books, navigational charts, technical manuals, and, most crucially, an Enigma machine still set to the day's encryption settings. This was pure gold. Intelligence that could decipher German communications and reveal U-boat patrol routes and expose advancements in torpedo and submarine design. It could save thousands of Allied lives. But there was a catch, and if the Germans learned the U-55 had been captured, they'd change their codes overnight, rendering the intelligence useless. And Gallery now faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you hide a 252-foot submarine and 58 prisoners of war? His solution was as bold as the capture itself. And, instead of following standard procedure, interrogating the prisoners and sending them to pogue camps, and risking leaks, Gallery made a decision that shocked both his crew and the Germans. As American boats approached the German sailors floating in the Atlantic and expecting death, something extraordinary happened. Instead of violence, the Americans pulled them aboard, provided medical care, dry clothes, and hot food. And Gallery wasn't just being humane, he was playing a long game. Well-treated prisoners were less likely to escape or talk, and, preserving the secrecy of the capture, Gallery met with Harold Lange and the senior German officers, and explaining that their submarine had been captured legitimately. They were now prisoners, but would be treated with military honor to protect the intelligence, and they'd be isolated from other pools. What he didn't tell them was that this isolation would last until the war's end. The German crew was secretly transported to Camp Ruston, Louisiana, in small groups, blindfolded, and undercover stories that they'd been captured in North Africa. At Camp Ruston, they found conditions that stunned them: clean barracks, and regular meals often better than what American soldiers got overseas, and recreational activities. Gallery's orders were clear, and treat the U-505 crew as professional sailors, not criminals. They could work for wages, maintain military discipline, and enjoy male privileges. And this wasn't just kindness, it was strategic genius. The Germans' gratitude made them cooperative, and, providing technical details, they enhanced the intelligence haul. The Enigma machine and code books gave Allied codebreakers a massive advantage, and saving countless ships and lives. Charts revealed U-boat patrol routes, allowing convoys to avoid them. Technical manuals exposed German innovations, and which Allied engineers used to improve their own designs. Gallery's approach, treating enemies with dignity, proved revolutionary, and it became a model for prisoner operations, with other commanders adopting similar tactics, yielding better intelligence and fewer security issues. And for the German crew, the experience was transformative, and men raised on propaganda that painted Americans as barbarians discovered their captors were professional sailors, much like themselves, and capable of both fierce combat and profound decency. Harold Lange, who expected execution that June morning and lived until 2003 and often spoke of how Gallery's actions restored his belief in humanity. And the U-505's capture remained a secret throughout the war and for years after. The crew was repatriated to Germany in 1946, and returning to a devastated country where 75% of U-boat crews had perished. Their stories of humane treatment were initially met with disbelief, but they became a testament to honor in warfare. In 1954, when the U-505 was moved to Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, and German U-boat veterans who had settled in America volunteered to help preserve it alongside American veterans. Together, and they ensured this story of humanity would endure. The capture of the U-505 wasn't just a military triumph, it was a moral one. And Captain Gallery had every reason to sink the submarine and leave its crew to drown. Wartime norms and hatred would have justified it. Instead, and he chose a path that required more courage, treating his enemies with respect. This decision didn't just save 58 lives or secure vital intelligence, and it showed that even in war's darkest hours, humanity could prevail. And Gallery's legacy is a reminder that victory through honor is more enduring than victory through brutality. His choice proved that individuals, and even in the chaos of total war, can act with decency. The American sailors who took part called it their proudest moment, not for capturing a submarine, but for showing humanity when it was least expected. For the Germans, it was a lesson that their enemies were not monsters, but men capable of compassion. And if your family has stories from World War, moments when honor overcame hatred, when enemies chose humanity over vengeance, or when ordinary people made extraordinary moral choices, share them in the comments. These stories matter, and they remind us that decency isn't bound by nation or era. It lives wherever people choose to see their enemies as fellow humans, deserving of dignity. And even in the most terrible war in history, the WWII stands today not just as a relic of war, but as a monument to the power of choosing humanity over hatred, and a lesson as vital now as it was in 1944.